The air raid had ended hours earlier, but the city still burned in scattered pockets of quiet flame, smoke curling endlessly into the dull gray sky as if the ground itself were exhaling grief. Sergeant William Carter stepped carefully through the shattered remains of what had once been a narrow residential street, his boots crunching against broken glass, splintered wood, and fragments of lives torn apart in a single night of thunder from above. Walls stood in crooked silence, windows blown out, doorways collapsed inward like mouths frozen in silent screams. The world here no longer resembled a home. It resembled the aftermath of something that had devoured everything gentle and left only ash behind. As William passed the ruins of a small brick house, something caught his eye near the edge of the rubble. A soft shape, strangely out of place amid twisted metal and stone. He crouched slowly, pushing aside loose debris to reveal what lay beneath. A teddy bear. Its once light fabric was now darkened, stained unevenly with patches of dried blood. One button eye hung loosely by a thread, the other stared upward, clouded with dust and sorrow. Its fur was matted and dirt-streaked, yet its tiny stitched smile still remained, painfully out of touch with the devastation surrounding it. William froze. This was no soldier's possession, no relic of the battlefield. This had belonged to a child. He lifted the bear gently as though afraid it might crumble beneath his touch and turned it slowly in his hands. The soft fabric felt cold, lifeless, yet it carried the faint echo of warmth, as if it still remembered the arms that had once clung to it in comfort and fear. His eyes moved instinctively across the ruins, searching for any sign of the child who might have dropped it. A small shoe, a scrap of cloth, a trace of running footsteps frozen in shattered stone. But there was only silence. Somewhere in the chaos of that night, amidst falling bombs, collapsing walls, and desperate screams, a child had held this bear. And somewhere that child had been torn away from it, leaving behind the last fragment of innocence in a world that no longer protected such things. William swallowed hard, his grip tightening slightly around the toy. The weight it carried was not physical. It was unbearable. In that moment, he understood with painful clarity that this air raid had not only destroyed buildings and streets, it had stolen futures, lullabies, bedtime stories, and silent prayers whispered into soft fabric for protection that would never come. And standing there amid smoke and ruin, holding a blood-stained teddy bear in his hands, William realized this was not merely an abandoned toy. It was a witness. William remained crouched among the rubble, the blood-stained teddy bear resting carefully in his hands as if it were something sacred. Around him, the ruins whispered faintly in the shifting wind, carrying the bitter scent of smoke and scorched timber. Every cracked beam and shattered stone seemed to echo the same unspoken question: who had been here when the sky fell? He stood slowly and turned in a slow circle, scanning the destruction with a soldier's trained eye and a man's heavy heart. There were remnants of everyday life everywhere. A broken teacup half buried beneath brick dust, the twisted frame of a child's bed, a small music box crushed beneath a toppled wardrobe. This was not a battlefield where men had chosen to stand. This was a home. William tightened his jaw as he knelt again, gently placing the teddy bear atop a piece of flattened timber, setting it where it would not disappear beneath the debris. It felt wrong to let it simply vanish into the ruins as if it had never mattered. "This wasn't your fault," he murmured quietly, unsure whether the words were meant for the child, the toy, or himself. He could almost imagine it now, a small figure clutching the bear as the first explosion shattered the night, a mother's frantic voice calling out, hands grabbing desperately through smoke and darkness. The bear slipping free as everything dissolved into chaos. A final scream, then nothing. William clenched his fists, staring at the ruins as though daring them to reveal the truth they held so cruelly. A sudden cough broke the stillness. His body stiffened instantly, every nerve alert. He turned toward the sound, heart pounding harder with each second. Somewhere beneath a collapsed section of wall, faint movement stirred. The smallest hint of life clinging stubbornly to the wreckage. "Hello?" he called cautiously, stepping forward. Another sound answered, weaker this time, barely more than a trembling breath. William's gaze snapped back to the teddy bear before him, then toward the dark gap in the rubble. Cold realization crept into his chest. The child might not be gone, and as he moved toward the source of the sound, every instinct within him awakened, no longer driven by duty or command, but by the desperate hope that the small life who had once held this bear might still be waiting to be found. William moved with controlled urgency, careful not to dislodge the unstable debris as he approached the narrow gap between the fallen wall and the shattered remains of the roof. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of smoke that still lingered like a nightmare refusing to fade. He crouched low, angling his flashlight into the darkness. The beam illuminated broken bricks, splintered furniture, and crushed fragments of what might once have been a living room. Then, partially obscured by rubble, he saw movement. A small hand, pale, trembling, but alive. "Hey, you're okay," William said gently, lowering his voice instinctively as if loud sound itself might hurt the fragile moment unfolding. "I'm here now. I'm going to get you out." There was no response in words, only a slight shift as the hand withdrew and reappeared again, weaker this time. William reached forward carefully, brushing away loose debris with slow, deliberate movements, revealing the small face of a child pressed against cold stone. It was a little girl, no more than 5, her eyes half open, streaked with ash and fear. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only a soft whimper escaped. William's heart tightened painfully. "You're safe," he whispered. "Just hold on. I won't let anything fall on you." He signaled urgently to nearby soldiers, his voice cutting through the ruins with focused command. Within moments, careful hands joined his, lifting debris piece by piece, creating just enough space to pull the child free without causing the structure to collapse further. When she was finally lifted into the open air, she clung weakly to his uniform, her small fingers gripping as if releasing him meant vanishing back into the darkness. William held her close, wrapping his coat around her thin, shaking frame as he glanced instinctively back toward where she had been trapped. His eyes landed once more on the stained teddy bear resting on the plank of wood. He reached for it gently and placed it in her arms. At first, she stared at it with confusion, then recognition flickered softly in her exhausted eyes. Her arms tightened around the bear as if it were the one anchor still tethering her to something familiar, something safe. A faint breath escaped her lips. "Mine," she whispered. William nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Yes, he said quietly. "It's yours." You held on to it very bravely. The child buried her face into the bear, clinging to it as if to fight back every terrible memory that had pressed in around her. And for the first time since the air raid had torn this world apart, the smallest thread of comfort returned to her trembling body. In that broken street, amid ruins and smoke, William no longer saw only devastation. He saw survival. He saw the fragile persistence of innocence refusing to disappear, even when surrounded by the worst humanity could inflict upon itself. William carried the girl carefully through the shattered street, her arms wrapped tightly around the blood-stained teddy bear, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Every step he took was cautious, measured, aware that beneath the silence could still lurk danger. Yet his focus never left the small life pressed against his chest. Her breathing was shallow but steady now, her small body still trembling from shock and exhaustion. He could feel the faint rise and fall against his uniform, a quiet reminder that despite everything, she was still here. Still alive, he lowered his voice as he walked. "What's your name?" he asked gently. For a moment, she did not respond. Her fingers tightened slightly around the bear's worn ear. Then barely more than a whisper escaped her lips. "Lily." The name settled heavily in the air, delicate and fragile like a flower growing through cracked pavement. "Lily?" he repeated softly, offering a faint reassuring smile. "You're safe now. I'm going to take you somewhere warm, all right?" She did not answer, but her head shifted slightly against his shoulder, as if even acknowledging him required more strength than she had left to give. William passed soldiers moving silently through the wreckage, medics tending to the wounded, faces hollow with fatigue and sorrow. No one spoke as they saw the child in his arms. Their eyes said everything words could not: relief, grief, disbelief that anything so small had endured such terror. He reached a temporary aid station set up near the edge of the ruins, its canvas walls flapping gently in the scorched breeze. A nurse hurried forward, concern etched deeply into her expression as she glanced at Lily's fragile face. "Is she conscious?" she asked softly. "Barely," William replied. "But she's strong. She was holding on down there." The nurse nodded, carefully wrapping a blanket around Lily's thin shoulders. For a moment, the girl resisted, clutching her teddy bear closer, unwilling to let it go even as new hands tried to bring comfort. "It's all right," William murmured gently. "You can keep it. It's yours." Lily's eyes fluttered open slightly at his words, and she nodded faintly, pressing the bear against her chest as if sheltering herself inside its fading warmth. He watched as she was guided inside the medical tent, her small silhouette disappearing behind the canvas flap like the end of a fragile nightmare. Yet he stayed still for a moment, staring at the entrance where she had vanished, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow twisting in his chest. The ruins behind him remained as they always had, silent, cruel, unforgiving. But somewhere within them, a child had been pulled back from the edge. And that, he realized, was enough to make even the darkest night feel less endless. William stood a short distance from the medical tent, the echoes of distant fires crackling softly in the background as smoke drifted low across the ruined skyline. The night had begun to descend once more, painting the broken city in muted shadows, yet his thoughts remained fixed on the small figure now resting somewhere behind the thin canvas walls. Inside, Lily clutched her teddy bear as doctors checked her for injuries and wrapped her in warmth she had not felt since the sky first shattered above her. The toy, despite its stains and torn seams, was no longer just a comfort. It was her bridge back to something safe, to something that had once felt like home. William exhaled slowly, the tension finally easing from his shoulders. He could still picture her whisper, "Mine," the way her eyes had softened when the bear was returned to her arms. That moment had felt more powerful than any victory he had seen in this war. A nurse stepped outside quietly and approached him. "She's stable," she said gently. "Exhausted but strong. Very strong." He nodded once, relief settling into his chest like a fragile piece. "Good," he replied softly. "She's been brave enough for a lifetime already." The nurse glanced back at the tent before looking at him again. "She asked if you would come back." William hesitated. "I'll try," he said after a moment, "if the war allows it." The truth behind his words hung heavily in the air. There were no promises in a world like this, only moments, and the brief sparks of humanity that refused to die between them. As he turned away, his gaze swept once more over the devastated neighborhood where the teddy bear had first been found, lying silently in ash and debris. He realized then that the toy had been more than a relic of tragedy. It had been a guide, a signal, a quiet cry that had led him to a life that would not end beneath stone and flame. Somewhere behind him, Lily slept, her arms wrapped around the bear as if guarding the last fragment of a childhood the war had tried to erase. She did not yet understand what she had survived, but she had survived. And as William walked back into the smoke and ruin, one thought followed him with quiet certainty. Even in the aftermath of the most merciless destruction, even beneath blood-stained skies and broken homes, innocence could still endure, clinging not to weapons or flags, but to something as small and gentle as a teddy bear.